The time is here. We're diving into our big story. It is the announcement of the conference opponents for each school over the next 5 years. The model is called the Flex Protect 18. It builds on the principles of the schedule that was released in June before the two latest editions. That model protected historic rivalries, emphasized playing all of the other conference opponents as frequently as possible. The number 18, obviously a nod to the 18 schools with the additions of Washington and Oregon, as well as USC and UCLA. It's Big Ten today. Dave Revson, Howard Griffith, Jake Butt. We're going to be with you for the next hour, so we've expanded the show by a half hour today. We're going to dive into these matchups. But first, before we get into the matchups, we want to explain to you how this came about. There was a ton of thought that went into it, that went into this model. Want to explain to you what the backstory is and what the priorities were and how well they were achieved. It will boggle your mind a little bit. It is really impressive. There are 12 protected games. We'll get to those in a moment. Outside of the protected rivals, each team is going to play the other teams in the conference at least twice, once home and once away, in a 5-year span. No team will play any other team more than 3 times every 5 years. So you play your rivals every year. You play everyone else either 2 or 3 times in 5 years. The conference never wavered from the 9-conference game format. Again, the goal has always been to play one another frequently. Competitive balance was a goal. The idea is for the schedules to be as equitable as possible based on historic trends, also to position the conference well for maximizing entry into the expanded CFP as it evolves. And then there's travel. That is a major focus. A lot of time was spent on that. No team will head west more than once in a season. As far as the West Coast teams, the years that they have 5 road games, one of those road games will be their rivalry game. So in other words, in years UCLA has 5 conference road games, one of those games will be USC, and then vice versa, obviously, in the other years. Same for Oregon and Washington. So it minimizes travels for those schools. So that was the list of priorities. We'll dive a little bit more into the details, and obviously we're going to get into the schedules here in a bit. But I do think it's important to talk about the overarching philosophy. What stands out there?
Yeah, to me, the ability to travel, or you don't have to travel as much, in the fact that the student athlete gets to play in all of these venues. I think that's a big part of what they wanted to achieve. Travel restrictions or limiting some of the travel to the West Coast was a big part of it as well.
That's one of the best parts about being a student athlete is the experience and to get to go play in some historic stadiums and some big matchups. The one thing that stood out to me was a few key words here: maintain control and flexibility as postseason evolves. Because the one thing we've learned here is that the one constant is change. Who knows what tomorrow brings? Further change could come. So when you build in the option to stay fluid and stay flexible, that's just smart forward thinking for the conference as a whole.
Again, there was so much time that went into this. I spent some time on the phone yesterday with Kevin Pauga, who I think people probably know by now, but he is a scheduling guru. Originally was working with Michigan State basketball, has expanded to include conferences and teams all over the country. He was telling me there's so many permutations and combinations that he would input data into his computer, go to sleep, send it up to the cloud, and then when he woke up, he'd have dozens of schedules to sift through based on all of the priorities that they had put together. So incredible amount of time. There's amazing detail. We talk about the travel. He was telling me they went so far as to think about travel time to and from airports. So in other words, the flight might be longer, but the travel to the airport is shorter. Purdue, the airport's right on campus. So how does that change the factors there in terms of the travel? He also emphasized, and we're not going to show you all 5 years of the schedules. We're going to show you the first 3 years because everyone's going to play one another in those first 3 years. But if you look at it over 5 years, there will never be a 3-year gap between schools playing one another. So if you play in year 1, you will play again before year 5, right? You're not going to have play in year 1 and then not play years 2, 3, and 4. So the level of detail is amazing. The protected rivalries were so important to everyone in the league. And so let's look at those. There are 12 of them. There were 11 in the spring. The only difference is Oregon and Washington was added. Other than that, these are the same protected games. The conference worked with the athletic directors to understand which games were most important to their fan base. Iowa has 3 protected rivals. Penn State has none. Everyone else has 1 or 2. Again, these games are going to be played every year. It's important to note that next year, the location of these games will be the opposite of this year. So you won't have anyone on the road for their rivalry game in consecutive years, even though we are moving to a new format. In fact, no team will play a road game against the same opponent this year and next year. So amazing level of detail here, and you guys both played in huge rivalry games. I think they were always going to protect these games. I don't think you were ever going to go from a format where you announced in the spring that these games are important and suddenly they're not. But these games are so big to the players and to the fan bases.
First off, I'm just glad someone much smarter than me is figuring out all this stuff of home and away and travel. Yeah, and we just get to sit back and watch some good football get played. And for the rivalries, that's what makes college football. That's what's so special about it, right? Like you're almost born into these rivalries. And to protect that and emphasize, that's a smart thing to do, and they did a good job.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You talk about protecting those. But how about some of the new rivalries that'll come up? That's what's really so exciting to me about this. And let's take the players out and just to think about the fan bases, right? Big Ten fans want to travel to some of these historic venues. So the opportunities to go back and forth is going to be a lot of fun.
It is going to be amazing. And when you start getting into some of these games, you kind of start salivating thinking about them. It's already an amazing league. And then you add in these 4 schools that are really rocking and rolling right now, that are playing very good football. And I love that they protected the rivalries that matter. They didn't force rivalries. They didn't say, well, everyone's got to have 1 or everyone's got to have 2. The rivalries that matter have been clearly articulated. Those are preserved. And then, as you say, Howard, so many new opportunities to create them.